It's been described as the Amazon.com of illegal drugs. The website, Silk Road, now shut down, allowed users to buy and sell illicit items and the currency of choice to purchase those items, the digital currency Bitcoin. Joining us now to tell us more about this digital currency and where it fits in the world of traditional sovereign currencies, here's Tim Richardson. He's e-commerce professor at Seneca College and instructor in e-commerce at the University of Toronto. Tim, nice to meet you. What's Bitcoin?
Bitcoin is a crypto digital currency. And when we say crypto, meaning secret, but digital meaning it doesn't have a stored value like a Tim Hortons card or those kinds of things.
So I can't hold it in my hand?
No, you can't. Let me give you an analogy. It's sort of like PayPal in the sense that you can use it for buying things, but it doesn't come from a branded consumer products company, and you don't have to identify with a credit card when you're using it. It's sort of like uncut diamonds, which are used for anonymity, but it's not physically tangible like that. It doesn't have the same association, but it's also used by criminal organizations because of the anonymity.
Who invented it?
A guy named, well, that's the question. Is it a guy or a group? The name of the person is Satoshi Nakamoto, sometimes also known as Satoshi Nakamura. That's a Japanese name, which means very simply, Satoshi is the Japanese word for clear thinking. Nakamoto is one of the top 10 most common Japanese names. It just means middle of the village or middle village. So some people think it's not even a real person, it's a group of people. This person is a little bit of a recluse and developed this very complicated algorithm for the process of mining, and which I can explain these currencies. In his communication with his followers, he's becoming more and more reluctant to identify what he is and his background, and more recently said, don't emphasize me being as an individual person. So we don't know if he's a person or a group.
There are lots of currencies around the world. Why do we need a virtual digital currency?
Well, that's an excellent question, because the requirement for that is because some of the national sovereign currencies don't work in a digital context. So some of the reasons why Bitcoin would be popular is because we have an increasing demand for things like micropayments, where people want to pay for something maybe a tenth of a cent. It could be either for viewing a picture or for a portion of a piece of, a video file or an audio file, those kinds of things. Mobile payments. As you know, more people are accessing web content through mobile devices such as smartphones, superphones, and tablets than they are desktop and notebook computers. So people want to be able to have some kind of structure for buying and selling. We also have the whole person-to-person thing. Person-to-person for an individual like you and me doing something, and also exchanging between people back in a country that they came from, immigrants, or either be economic migrants or people from distressed countries. And also young people that want to buy things. You know, if a young person doesn't have a credit card, they can't get a PayPal account. So that leaves a whole group of people between, say, the ages of 12, 13, 14 that might have money for all kinds of reasons, but can't buy things on the internet.
Well, how do you get bitcoins?
Well, that's a very complicated situation. Bitcoins are sort of an intangible thing that's created by mining. And mining is a slang expression to describe a process where you take the software and use a very powerful computer to be able to create a bunch of calculations. It's almost like doing a Sudoku puzzle in a sense. And when you solve it, you get a coin. And that coin can be used to buy something, or somebody can trade it from you for something else. But in the process of doing this, if you use that analogy, it's kind of like a Sudoku puzzle where it goes, instead of 4 squares wide, it's 5 squares wide. And 6 squares wide. And as you're solving this particular square, someone else comes and writes something in. So that's why people who do this mining to get the results and get the coin use very, very powerful computers. These are computers that might be, $10, $15, $20,000. We're talking desktop PCs that are running very, very high CPUs. It's not someone doing it from their, superphone.
So the average person wouldn't be doing this. You'd have to have a lot of computer savvy to do this.
Yeah, quite a bit.
Okay. Here's this issue of who's in control. I mean, I know if I pull a $5 bill out of my pocket, the government of Canada backs it, the Bank of Canada backs it. It has a foundation under it which gives it value. I want to read something here because I don't understand how Bitcoin has foundational value. This is from Wired magazine. One of the core challenges of designing a digital currency involves something called the double spending problem. If a digital dollar is just information, free from the corporeal strictures of paper and metal, what's to prevent people from copying and pasting it as easily as a chunk of text, spending it as many times as they want? The conventional answer involved using a central clearinghouse to keep a real-time ledger of all transactions, ensuring that if someone spends his last digital dollar, he can't then spend it again. The ledger prevents fraud, but it also requires a trusted third party to administer it. So in the case of Bitcoins, who's that trusted third party that's administering all of this e-commerce activity?
The very complex software. Let me use an analogy to explain how it works. Let's say we're talking about a massive picture puzzle. And as we put the pieces into place, we get rewarded with currency. But as my hand is reaching forward to put this picture of the puzzle in place, somebody says, Tim's putting it down, it's being put down. Actually not my name, but that it's being put down. And other people say, yeah, it's put down in place, it's put down in place now, his hand is moving back. So the identification of the transaction taking place is validated by the software so that I can't accidentally then say, well, no, I didn't put it there, I've now got two.
So
that's what they're talking about in the Wired magazine article. And that's one of the failures of a lot of digital currencies, is because anytime something digital, you could right button click and copy that picture and so on. Again, I mean, not to depart from the main topic, but that's one of the failures of the porn sites that make money, is everybody could just right button click content and bleed away their profits because it's just so easy to do that. So the same thing with the digital currency. So the challenge is to come up with a software structure that validates the process of how the currency is actually made, and that a person can't renege on that process.
Okay, the other concern I imagine people would have around this is about security. And let me read again from Wired Magazine an excerpt about that. Even the purest technology has to live in an impure world. Both the code and the idea of Bitcoin may have been impregnable, but Bitcoins themselves, unique strings of numbers that constitute units of the currency, are discrete pieces of information that have to be stored somewhere. By default, Bitcoin kept users' currency in a digital wallet on their desktop, and when Bitcoins were worth very little, easy to mine, and possessed only by techies, that was sufficient. But once they started to become valuable, a PC felt inadequate. So how secure is this currency?
Well, that's the problem. Anytime you aggregate something together for a purpose to be used, then you make it a vulnerable situation. So just like I could reach in your wall and take a couple of $20 bills, presuming you had them, I could rob you. But if I got your strip on your bank card with a PIN number, I could take a lot more. So that's precisely what they're talking about, is although the concept of Bitcoin makes sense and is indeed valid, the question is, how do you then take the product and use it to spend? That's where the vulnerability is, because when we're talking about what they refer to as the wallet, that's one of the weaknesses there.
How many people around the world do you think are doing this right now?
Several million, but they're in a particular narrow target market segment, and they're broken down into several different types of people. There's people, for example, a lot of them would be university or college students that are doing for interest's sake, because it's like I said, doing the Sudoku puzzle. The reward of connecting all those pieces together is the coinage themselves. Now, if they have something to buy with that coin, fine. If not, then they can trade that for other things, either some other type of stored value instrument or not. Then there's also the criminal organizations, which find this useful compared to, say, using blood diamonds, which is a lot more difficult to get. And notwithstanding the sensational movies about that, it's not really all that practical. And then there's also the government organizations. The U.S., of course, has been very aggressive about pursuing this, but people met at number 10 Downing Street in the UK to talk about this. The German government has recognized it. If I pulled out my smartphone right now and went on to the United Currency Exchange, I can tell you what $1 Canadian equals in Bitcoins. So it is becoming quite recognized. The question is how long it's going to stay in that position.
Okay, help me out with this. We are here, actually. These studios are in 2180 Yonge Street, which is where the world headquarters for Canadian Tire is. Canadian Tire has its own currency.
Yes.
It's not recognized by the Government of Canada and the Bank of Canada, but it's recognized by Canadian Tire, which means if I have Canadian Tire money, I can spend it at Canadian Tire.
Yes.
If I have Bitcoins, where do I spend Bitcoins?
Well, that's the thing. You can spend them anywhere. Canadian Tire money is only valuable to someone that wants Canadian Tire money. So I know at small mom and pop restaurants in Western Canada where I used to live, you could buy breakfast for $4 with 3 $1 bills and a couple of 50 cents. You could use Canadian Tire money that way. More commonly, obviously, used in the Canadian Tire store, and that's to drive, reward programs and so on. Just like we have Aeroplan points, just like we have Tim Hortons cards and so on. This sort of structure's been around for quite some time. But wouldn't it be fantastic if everybody around the world loved Canadians so we could use our Canadian Tire money in many other countries? Here's the thing that's interesting, to make an analogy between this and Bitcoin. If I took my $1 Canadian Tire money and left it on the table overnight, and I came back the next day and it split into two 50-cent pieces, who then grew and became $1, wouldn't that be amazing? That's precisely what Bitcoin has. As a structure, it becomes more valuable and grows in value over a period of time, because there's a finite number that can be mined. So that's one of the interesting characteristics of this as a digital cryptocurrency.
Okay, one of the reasons that this came to the public's attention recently was because of this what is it, Silk Road website that's now been shut down. What was Silk Road?
That's a transactional online digital eBay for bad guys, so to speak, right? And any type of structure like that affords the anonymity to the person to be able to trade and exchange for all kinds of things.
So you can buy drugs on the website and
yeah, you
guns
could.
and whatever
Of course,
else.
there's also the question of how you identify where you're going to actually receive them, and that's a little bit of a vulnerability right there. But people were always saying sensational things like you could hire a contract killer and all kinds of very extreme things like that, which causes law enforcement agencies to key in on that, because then you can create some effective deterrence.
Why did Silk Road, that website, only accept Bitcoin as payment?
Because the anonymity of the person paying. The payment itself is not anonymous, and the amount and the way it's actually generated through the mining process, that's not anonymous. But the person who's offering it, that's anonymous. So think of the analogy of making a PayPal payment. I could use my bunny34@hotmail.com or whatever as my contact for the PayPal, but still backed up by a credit card, and somebody knows where that is,
right.
So you can be found. So that's the situation.
How prevalent do you think Bitcoin is in the criminal world?
I think it's a niche market. I don't think it's prevalent as much as people might think it is, but it depends on what sort of category of criminal enterprise you're looking at. Whether it's a pharmaceutical item like a knockoff of some branded consumer product or a consumer pharmaceutical, or an illegal pharmaceutical that's sold in large quantities out of a Latin American country. That's the question.
So this website's been shut down, and it's no longer a place where Bitcoin can do its thing. Has that been a serious dent in Bitcoin's ability to be a significant player around the world?
Well, you'd think so, because usually when companies are, we say, first mover situations, like a company like Yahoo as a first search engine said, when it suffers a big setback like that, number of people using it would drop off. And if you looked at a line chart of Bitcoin usage and the volumes of trading, it did drop off for the first couple of days, but it's gone right back up again. So that's very interesting, because the people who are supporting Bitcoin say that was just one part. It got hijacked and sensationalized, but there's a whole bunch of other things people are using it for as well. I mean, the classic example is the libertarians that don't like government oversight and want to use it for buying and selling all kinds. The people that don't get a driver's license and refuse to have their passport picture taken.
Did I read something a while ago about you remember The Social Network, that movie, and about Zuckerberg and how he started Facebook, and you had those Winklevoss twins?
Yep, they're into it big time.
They're big into it, aren't they?
Oh yeah, indeed.
They're betting the farm that this thing is going to take off huge.
But the question is not whether it's going to succeed, but who's going to come along next. We have a number of examples of dot-com type of situations where we use that phrase, the early bird gets the worm. And that's typically the case, for a big company like McDonald's, for example. For decades and decades, it had that first mover advantage, until recently when Subway took over. Why? Because Subway costs less, and you have economic migrants from other countries around the world want to start a branded store. It's an easy thing. A more recent example would be Yahoo, the first search engine. But Yahoo's not a verb, it's a noun. Google's a verb, right? So sometimes the second mouse gets the cheese. The point being that you can look at the mistakes of somebody else and not replicate them. So there are a number of vulnerabilities with Bitcoin.
Well, if I've understood you correctly, Bitcoin may be first into this market, but it may be the second guy who comes along who's going to do better. Is there a second player yet in this game?
Well, there's a number of different players. I mean, there's Litecoin, there's Feathercoin, there's PP Coin, and non-coin, and there's also different type of structures and variants as well. You have enterprises or situations like Mintchip, which is the Canadian government's answer to Bitcoin. It's run by the Royal Canadian Mint, actually, and it's just basically it's a digital currency. It's equivalent to the digital equivalent to what we call a fiat currency, and it uses the type of personal identification which is in a chip for person-to-person transactions. That's one of the things that's very interesting, is the person-to-person transaction aspect of this, which was growing in popularity around the world, and people are looking for this. So it's not so much the point of, is Bitcoin to continue, but is the demand for Bitcoin to continue? Yes, it is.
Let's take it away from person to person and look at the greater real economy. Is there any significant company right now that is actually into this? As an example, could I go into McDonald's and pull out my smartphone and pay for a Big Mac using Bitcoins?
No, not at McDonald's, that specific example. But there are many, many varieties of people selling books, movies, branded consumer products online, services.
Reputable companies?
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. I mean, there's everything from transportation services to vacation services, not things like real estate, but usually things that, not necessarily things that are commodities, but usually things that have a competitive economic environment.
So this is not just something that exists in the shadows. This is a legitimate way of making a financial transaction. Do you believe more and more companies going forward are going to embrace this?
Yes,
currency?
Because you simply look at the way that so many other people have copied. As they move through the introduction to the growth stage of the product life cycle, many other people are copying this scenario. You have companies like Vertex in Calgary, which is trading Bitcoins. Unfortunately, RBC closed their account. But there's many people else. There's also almost like a second industry of people feeding this. People selling you $15,000, $20,000 computers so you can mine the coins and all the things associated with that.
Last question. What's the incentive for consumers to use these things? I mean, right now we can pay for things with credit cards, debit cards, cash, IOUs. What do we need this for?
Well, partly it has to do with the frequency and the amount that you're paying for. So if I wanted to pay for something that was 7.25 cents, how would I do that?
Well, who charges 7.25 cents for anything?
Well, you'd be surprised if you're looking at just simply a view of a picture or a clip of a soundbite or things like that. And increasingly, the ability for websites to make money is based on the monetization of the content on the website. And if you can't do that because you can only sell things in increments of $1 and $5 and so on using a national-based currency, you limit yourself. So there's a great demand for people to have a way to be able to pay for small things on the internet and also in the peer-to-peer context of small things as well.
Do you do this? Are you a Bitcoin guy?
I do have students that are miners, but I haven't got time for spending $20,000 on a computer to do mining and sit around all day doing that. But some people think it's great.
Gotcha. Well, I learned more about it in the last 15 minutes than I knew about it in the previous X number of years. Tim Richardson from Seneca College and the U of T. Thanks for coming in tonight.
My pleasure.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.